This segment of Open Up is brought to you in part by Abeta-Weed, the locally owned company that has everything you need for lush, weed-free gardens and lawns, from the smallest backyards to the property of the biggest businesses, and with top quality equipment and products better than the big chains, and they service what they sell. Located on Rosedale Highway, just east of Callaway, across from the promenade. Be loyal, buy local, abetaweed.com.
And thank you, Abeta-Weed. We're back talking with Ken Wheeler. And Ken, I would like you to, we had a question from an audience member. Could you just address that, talk about that just a little bit, please? Since we're on camera, that was on camera.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Could you rephrase the question, please? I'm sorry.
Audience member, please. Your question was...
You want me to ask it over here?
I apologize, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Basically, when you talk about those YouTube diatribes from atheists towards Christianity, are they really reacting to true Christianity or the picture of Christianity that we as the church have presented the world?
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes. Thanks, Bob. That is correct. The reaction to Christianity is because of things that have been done in the name of Christianity. Mm-hmm. It's not Christianity itself. It's not the gospel message of Christ, and I do talk about that in the book as far as the things that have been done in the name of Christianity that have been wrong, that are not the message of Jesus. Okay, well, that's what people have responded
And
to.
in more modern times, where Christianity has allowed itself to be identified with one side of the political spectrum.
Correct. That's correct. And so people do, in my opinion, rightfully respond. Now, I wouldn't respond hatefully. I don't think that's the way we should do it. But
Right.
but in a way that they disagree with it strongly, I don't have a problem with that. And I accept those sort of challenges, and it's okay because to me it opens a door to allowing to teach what the true message of the gospel really is, and hopefully it's done properly that way.
Okay.
Ken, I remember former United States Senator Mark Hatfield of Oregon once often called the conscience of the Senate. He was a very outspoken evangelical Christian, testifying for Christ in many of his official contexts, and yet he was a political liberal.
Yes.
And when he would vote for what some saw the liberal side of an issue, his phone bank in his office would light up with so-called Christians calling up and just with the most vile language in the name of Christ, so vile that his staff could only stay on the phone about 2 hours at a time. That's about as much abuse as they could take. I mean, it's that kind of side of Christianity that is really ugly.
It is ugly, and we have to keep in mind that we're all just people, whether we're an unbeliever or a believer. We're still a person, and unfortunately a sinful person, and that's just the way it is. And so there's not an excuse for that, but it does happen, and so there's nothing wrong, in my opinion, for an unbeliever, for atheists to address that, to challenge Christians that way. That's correct in my view.
In your book, you have the ignorance of atheism, the new 10 Commandments. What's that all about?
Well, in many times, in fact, you can go online, and if you enter the new 10 Commandments, you can find lots of different variations of them, and that actually was brought out in Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, and he mentioned that, and he actually wrote a new list of 10 Commandments. And what that is saying is that we don't need the 10 Commandments of the Bible. We can create our own. We can create our own new 10, and that would be better. And so what I do is address that in the book, that the commandments, whether they're the real commandments or other commandments that are substituted, are not what those are not what perfect people or make people moral. If Moses, when he brought the 10 Commandments down from the mountain, and eventually the 613 laws that were given to Israel, those commandments are not what saved those people. They were still justified by faith, and it wasn't their works, their obedience to those commandments. Obeying commandments don't make people right with God, and that's why God gave the commandments, to show them that it's impossible for a man to obey all the commandments. There's no way a man can make himself right, even if he obeyed all 613 of those or 613 of somebody else's. And so when atheists come in and say, well, we'll just replace them and put those in there, Well, that process is faulted. It's not going to work, whether it's the real ones or ad infinitum, continuous new commandments.
I have a friend in Washington, D.C., who had a chance to spend some time with the grandson of Mao Zedong, the former leader of China. And this young man said to my friend that he had a Ph.D. in atheism. And my friend said, well, I've never met anyone with a Ph.D. in atheism. He said, tell me, what would a man like me need to know to have an intelligent conversation with someone with a Ph.D. in atheism? And he said, well, I don't believe in anything. And so my friend said, well, how interesting. He said, when did you become an atheist? And he said, my mother taught me to be an atheist. And he said, isn't that interesting? Your mother taught you to be an atheist. My mother taught me to be a Christian. But Christianity didn't change me. Did atheism change you? And he said, no, I guess not. And my friend said, I didn't change until I met Jesus Christ.
Right.
And the grandson said, tell me about him.
It's a wonderful
And
story, sure.
it turned it to be a wonderful conversation once it turned
That's
to the living
beautiful,
Christ.
John.
Absolutely. And that's a great story. The atheists do use that, as a matter of fact, as evidence against Christianity. The fact that that individual, for example, was a Christian because they were just raised that way. And so, but many times they do forget about the fact that, well, if you're raised atheist, there's a real high chance probability you're going to simply be atheistic in your belief as well. So, but they seem to ignore that, and yet they use that against Christians that, well, you just believe it because you were taught that way. And that ultimately was the reason why I studied my own faith, because I was raised in a Christian home, and I wanted to see if it stood up against the challenges that were brought against it. You know, Peter writes in his book, 1 Peter 3:15, for us to be ready to give a reason for the hope that we have that's in us. And so I don't believe for a second that all Christians have to do what I did and read all these books and study these things and such. But you still need to be able to give a reason to an unbeliever.
Yes.
Why do you believe these things? Well, and that's where it goes from.
Tell us more about what's in this book.
Well, I have chapters on why I'm not a moral atheist. You know, basically, I think the most important thing, the why I'm not a moral atheist gives my testimony, if you will, to a certain extent, and reasons for that. But the second chapter, if God is the creator, God makes the rules, I think that really addresses the main thought of that book, in the fact that a big argument by atheists against Christianity is they don't like the rules. They don't like the way that God did this or did that, whatever. And so in their opinion, then that proves that there couldn't possibly be a God that exists, because no God would actually make rules like this. Okay, well, my thought is, well, but if there is a God, the fact that you don't like his rules doesn't prove anything about his existence.
Right.
Any more than if I don't like traffic laws, that doesn't prove they don't exist. And so it's the same thing. So to me, that's kind of the anchor of the whole thing, that once we acknowledge that there is an objective lawgiver above mankind, which I believe is required, otherwise morality doesn't make any sense. So that's really the theme of that book. There are moral atheists, there's no question. I know I've had friends that are atheists, and they're wonderful people. And so, but in my view, if they don't have an objective lawgiver above themselves, then there's no reason for their morality. And that doesn't mean they have to turn out to be an axe murderer or a rapist or a pedophile, whatever. But there's no reason for them, in my opinion, not to steal, lie, and cheat their way through life to get themselves whatever they want. Pardon me.
So the case against moral atheism is...
The case against that is the fact that, in a nutshell, it doesn't make any sense to be moral if, in fact, you believe there is no objective lawgiver above man. You know, Michael Martin, who's a professor at Boston University, wrote two amazing books against Christianity, The Case Against Christianity and Atheism, A Philosophical Justification. And I lost my train of thought. He basically, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. It'll come back to you.
Yeah, well, in fact, if I can read.
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you. This brings me back. Thank you. Without a righteous God who defines morality, is not logical to live within moral guidelines, and a reasonable, open-minded, rationally thinking person should not live as if it were. And so if in fact we are just simply evolved goo, which Michael Martin does profess, then all we are simply animals of the jungle that can think and speak. Okay, but we're still evolved goo. And so by what rationale do we not take advantage of others?
I remember C.S.
Yes.
Lewis, a little example of that. Some guy crowds in line, and people in the back say,
Yes.
"Hey, you crowded." He said, "I don't recognize that rule."
That's right.
You know, there's no reason for me to. That's your rule. It's not my rule.
Exactly.
And so it's just moral anarchy if there's no.
And that's exactly right. And so I don't profess that that's where we want to go, because moral anarchy is exactly the logical conclusion if there was no moral guidelines. That's true. But Tim Keller, who is an amazing scholar and a preacher or a pastor of a huge church in New York City, he speaks of if you're on the Titanic and you're going down, then ultimately, if there is no God, if there's nothing beyond this day and you're both going to drown, okay, then it doesn't make any difference if you're a mugger or a hugger. So it doesn't matter if you hug your wife and drown or if you mug your neighbor and take his money. You're both going to die, and the end result is what it is.
Ken, thanks for giving me a
Thank
copy
you.
of this. And
Yes,
Tina,
and me too, Ken.
we'll look forward to reading it.
Ken's information is on the screen. Ken Wheeler, Wheeler's Fitness Equipment at 206 Bernard Street, right here in Bakersfield, 93306. His website, wheelersfitness.com, 327-7771. Thank you so very much,
My
Ken.
pleasure. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ken. Thanks for
coming.
taking this on.
We're going to a break, and when we come back, let's hear about the Toys for Tots.
Christmas in the
Yay!
worst neighborhood in Bakersfield.
Ding, 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 bells are ring.